everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. It's Francis, and with me again, I have Calvin. Calvin was on fairly recently to talk about forests in Ukraine, and today we're going to talk about forests here in the United States. Calvin, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine, Francis. I'm doing just fine.
Isn't it? Hasn't it been a great week?
It's a wonderful week if you do the kind of work that I do, which is largely driven by catastrophe and bad times.
Yeah, like finally we have somebody who, benefits from everything being on fire.
Well, I wouldn't say that I benefit. It just happens to be one of the things that is in my wheelhouse. Yeah,
right.
That and forest health and prions and climate change. It's a great time if you work in catastrophes. Great time. Business is booming.
As we sit and I keep checking in on Blue Sky and seeing the interview questions that are being asked of RFK and being like, yeah, that's fine. We're just all going to get a brain amoeba if we're lucky, I think. If we're lucky, we'll get a brain amoeba. So, Calvin, I brought you on because, like we said, we want to talk forests. You talked about forests before. We love our trees. Trees are very important to everything, not just because they give us oxygen, but they look nice and we like them. But all the trees in California seem to be on fire at the moment due to climate change. Now, before we get into too much, California, I just want to kind of get an idea of not California as a macro, kind of like the entire state, but just the LA area. Because I imagine forests in the LA area versus forests that are 600 miles to the north are a bit different, right?
Yeah. And the really interesting thing about California, really fantastic forests, except LA and the LA area, not really a forest. I mean, technically it meets the definition of a forest in that there are enough trees per acre to be a forest. But when you think big West Coast forest, do not think of LA.
Right.
Wrong forest type.
So I've been to LA, but you fly in, you cut through all the smog to land there. And you don't really see a lot of trees. So where is this forested area?
So the area that the big fire, the Palisades, et cetera, that's some of the forest that kind of surrounds the outside of LA. And so that's a chaparral. So a chaparral, for those of us who are not super into our various ecosystem types, it's a scrubby grassland savanna type ecosystem. So we have a lot of grasses and shrubs with some oak in there. This is going to be more of your, not like big tall oak trees like we have on the East Coast, but kind of, smaller, more scraggly growing trees. So like not super amazing from like big, when you go into the redwoods, like you have gorgeous forests. It's like 3-4 hours from LA. These are not those. These are much smaller, more of a dry land, kind of a drier area species.
Yeah. If you listen to our bonus episodes, and anytime we talk about watching Deadliest Warrior, I always joke that like they take these two people from history and drop them into a backlot in California. You can always tell it's the same California backlot because it's all the same kind of scrubby like brushes and trees, but nothing's really big and tall. As somebody, I don't know if you've been to the Ozarks before in Missouri or Arkansas.
I have. I've hiked the trail down there, the Ozark Trail.
Beautiful. I love, our Ozark, like Missouri is just like, if you go down to southern Missouri, it's all green. It's beautiful. I love, politics aside, this is a very beautiful state with a lot of different ecosystems inside of it, which is why we have a booming, I'm talking to a Californian, but we have our own wineries here in Missouri and they're almost as good as yours. But
I'm in Pennsylvania. I mean, our wine is terrible in Pennsylvania. No, it's awful. You don't want to drink this one. It's bad.
But Missouri, we have a lot of wineries. We have a lot of, we have like the northern area is old ice shelf. So it's very fertile up there and very flat. And then you get to lower Missouri. And it's the oldest mountain ranges, the Ozark Mountains, which are more hills at this point. But the trees out there, really big, beautiful trees. But again, our forests are big and thick and you're not going to wander through one. Like I feel like you can kind of in the LA forests. Like they just don't seem as dense and populated.
They're nice and sharp and pointy, lots of nice sticks, but it's really a drier ecosystem because we got to remember LA is largely a city that exists because of some huge aqueducts and viaducts. So if you ever look at like a satellite image of kind of the LA area, you're like it's very dry all around and then you have habitation, and that's because this is an artificial city that is created with water coming from the Sierras. And like, it's really, really right outside the Mojave Desert. Like, not a great place if you're thinking about like water availability. Tons of seawater. Humans famously can't drink seawater. And so that's why we have these nice scrubby plants. When I hiked in the Ozarks with my mom, we complained about the whole time, like, this would be a great view if it weren't for all the dang trees. LA, not the same problem. You can see, once you get through the scrub, you could see lots of great stuff. If, it's a challenging ecosystem to be in for a lot of things because it's hot and it's dry for a lot of the year. In Southern California, you have 2 seasons. You have kind of a monsoon season and then a drier season. So that's why we don't have huge, nice, big, beautiful trees like you have. Like when you get in the coastal redwood forest a little bit further up north or a little bit more to the Sierras, it's just hot, dry here, which is then one of the appealing things of LA. It is like mostly 70 degrees and it barely rains.
It is very nice. I understand. Every time I go to LA, I'm always enamored with the city because it's big and it's like you can go from one city to another and not even realize it. It's like LA and Anaheim and Orange County are all like different things, but they're all smashed together pretty much. And it is a beautiful place where every time we would go in the summer and there'd usually be, I think we went to Disneyland and we saw people like, oh God, it's like 90 degrees and humid. And like every Californian was melting. And, Missourians, we don't give a shit. Like hot, sweaty, wet, sticky. That's just a state of being during the summer for your average Midwesterners. So,
oh, yeah.
That's the upside to having, all these rivers. It just makes everything wet constantly.
Yeah, but it's nice dry heat in California. You don't have to deal with the sweat. And when you do sweat, it goes right away.
It goes right away. Yeah, I have to go to Las Vegas later this year. And I've been to Vegas. I've been to Vegas too. But, talk about if LA is a middle finger to God, then then Las Vegas is showing your entire ass to the full pantheon.
And we won't even discuss Phoenix. That's just an insane idea to have a city that large in that place. No thanks.
Yeah, it doesn't. Our Western hemisphere, or our Western United States, a lot of it doesn't make sense. And it seemed like it was a lot of, no, we're going to put something here so that we can claim that it's ours, and we're not going to think about where we're going to get water in 200 years. We're just not going to think about that.
This is the one time we do get to blame it on the Spaniards, because especially when you look at like LA, like Los Angeles, it's a Spanish, a lot of these are mission-founded cities. So you do get to blame it on the Spaniards here.
Okay, good.
This is not just an America problem.
I'm always happy to blame the Spaniards.
I guess I'm not super familiar with the history of Phoenix, but I'll bet that there's a Pueblo, there's a Spanish mission back in there somewhere. We'll just blame it on them somehow.
It's always the fault of the Catholics. I've found that usually. It's okay. I can say that I'm a former Catholic.
So LA is a hot, dry area. And the other thing that's really important for folks to remember about Los Angeles is we have the Santa Ana winds. These are a high pressure system that moves in seasonally. And so it comes from the Mojave down out towards the ocean. And again, hot, dry wind. So really great to dry stuff out. And this year they got up to like 100 miles an hour. And that's high, but it's not uncommon. So when we're thinking about this area, hot, dry, and in the winter, it is windy. And these are winds that blow pretty steady between 30 and 60 miles an hour, maxing out 100 plus gusts. So hot, dry, windy. Great place if you are a fire.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
If you're a very hungry fire.
Yeah.
If you are a cigarette butt that hasn't been properly put out, have we got a pile of brush for you?
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I almost forgot to mention is the topography of LA. So like where a lot of the city is kind of flat, and then as you get a little further back, you get into the canyons. Mm-hmm. So you have some really great topography and some really, striking canyons. You can get some really cool vistas and stuff like that, but tough access in, tough access out. It is tough to walk around in a lot of these places, because it is sharp, it is rocky, it is steep, and then there are just random cliffs that you're just going to run into. It's like, well, we go no further. I, as a person, walk no further because this goes up 100 feet or 50 feet in a sheer rock wall. So we're done here.
I tell you, we went to Universal Hollywood last year, and I'm used to, like, we'll go to Florida, we'll go to, other places in Missouri and in the Midwest, and we'll go to LA a lot. And I'm always struck, one, LA is like just in a bowl. Like it feels like when you're flying in, you've got this huge mountain ranges on one side and then kind of a lip on the other side. So it sits sits in this bowl and then like, creates all of its own smog, and all the smog kind of sits there. And I'm surprised, like in the Midwest is really the only place that tornadoes happen, right? Like, because we have very specific weather patterns that allow for tornadoes. They don't really happen anywhere else. There's like one or two other places, but the Midwest, like 90% of tornadoes. And I'm surprised that with the topography of California in general and this area, like you said, with the Mojave Desert on one side, mountains, all of that there's not more. Like, it's crazy that like all of this stuff has created this like almost utopian weather pattern where you say it's always 70 degrees and it's never raining, which of course, here comes climate change. So all that's going to change. But
we'll get to climate change. We'll get
right.
there.
But it's just like all of these, like I understand why LA exists like over the last 100 years, because it does seem like a place that's really set on California, and there's a lot of really great access to a lot of great things. I believe in LA, don't they say you're an hour away from surfing and an hour away from skiing?
I think so, but I also know that some friends from Lebanon, and they say that about Lebanon too. So I think they say that about a lot of places.
You could say that about Missouri too. We have a ski mountain. So
I used to live in Marquette, Michigan, and there were people who would surf in the winter in Marquette. So you could do the same thing in Marquette, except you'd be, if you wanted to classic ski, you'd be, you could ski up to the beach and then surf and then get out.
That sounds very cool. I'm not a cold weather person.
This is for folks who are unfamiliar with the Midwest. This is Lake Superior. Also, Francis, we do have to do quick Midwest chat. I got to tell you, Oklahoma is not in the Midwest.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Count Missouri in the Midwest. I'm a Wisconsin UP boy here, so Missouri barely counts for me. If we get down to the counties, I say a lot of Missouri is not Midwest. So,
but I understand these arguments. I go by the Wikipedia map, so it's pretty much, and I feel like everybody just likes to glom onto the Midwest because there's East Coast and there's West Coast, and there's not really like this cultural hegemony in the between the mountain ranges, right?
You have the Intermountain West, you have the Great Plains. These all are fantastic
nobody
places.
Knows. What are we going to celebrate in Nebraska? Come on now.
No, that's why they go in the Great Plains. It's what the Great Plains are for. I will say also, when we have a little bit of a platform here, the Dakotas, you don't need two Dakotas. One Dakota. We should have a single Dakota. Smash those two bad boys together.
My belief is that we hold on to the Dakotas in case we need some fast money. We can sell it to Canada. We can. It's like it's like the pocket watch from Grandpa that you're like, well, maybe one day I'll be able to pawn that if I need $1,000.
I don't know if they're going to give us a lot for North Dakota. I don't really see a lot happening.
Especially South Dakota. We already like dynamited our president's faces into some of the mountains there. We're not getting our deposit back. If we were renting, we've got holes in the walls where we've been punching the walls while angry. South Dakota is just it's a hole. It's a money pit basically.
We punched a lot of holes in the Dakotas in the fracking boom. So there's a lot of things in the Dakotas where it's like, well, you know what? I think we could just have one. Canada wants we do Canada. We could have conversations about land back. I'm not sure if people want to have the Black Hills. I see why you want to have the Black Hills back, but a lot of the Dakotas, like, hey, you know what? Whoever wants to take it, go for it.
I'm fine with Missouri not being considered Midwest, even though we have a whole like archway that is the gateway to the West, and we are in the middle of it. But that's fine. I'm not going to argue semantics, because it's Missouri. Who gives a shit? I have often argued for Missouri to be cut up and parted out to all 7 states that touch it. So it's a state that doesn't really need to exist. Like we have like ranching Missouri. There's like ranching down in the southwest area near Oklahoma, where like all the really ranching plains happen. We've got all the farmlands up north. We've got all the mountains down south. So it would make sense if we just kind of cut these biomes up and gave them to other states. It's not like our government's been doing a real bang up job of it,
Well, you got some stiff competition for worst government in that area. I got to say, there are some Oklahoma. Again, looking at you, Oklahoma, not doing great on a lot of fronts. Not doing great. Really not. Kansas surprisingly not bad though. So we'll see if that. Kansas was surprisingly progressive for a couple of years. Not sure how well that's gonna hold out. Missouri, I'd say our politics are libertarians who shoot themselves in the foot. That's most libertarians. Yeah. It's a lot of, we love weed, but we also love big government for some reason. I don't know. So enough about the terrible place that I live. Let's talk about the terrible place where other people live. Okay. So surrounding LA, we do have these beautiful mountain ranges. We have the Cleveland National Forest is outside of San Diego. You got some great forests in the area. Again, let's not think of them as big tree forests. They're really more scrubby, oaky canyons. Right. So So that's the area that we're in. It is hot and dry, and then we have these big winds that come through. Now, if we are thinking about a great place to have fire, this is a fantastic place for it. It's hot, it's dry, it's occasionally very windy, and when it's hot and dry for a while in the dry season. So fantastic place to have a fire. So if we look back at the history of this landscape, it is a fire-dominated landscape. We should have fires, small fires every couple of years, and then we call a stand replacing fire. So it comes through, kills a lot of vegetation every 30 to 60 years. So it's hot, it's burning a lot. That's what we should have historically. And the other thing I want to mention when we're thinking about the history of this landscape is like a lot of these fires were set by First Nations for land management purposes because it's much better to be in this. So
you can burn. There's healthy burns as you've talked about, as I'm sure most people know. But yeah, sometimes you gotta have a little fire to prevent the big fire.
Yeah, or you have a big fire so that way you can do stuff in the landscape, or it's better for farming and for movement, etc. So yeah, so there's a lot of fire has happened here historically. LA gets built, and then obviously you don't want to burn down LA, and that's why we're having this conversation. So when you build LA, a lot of stuff changes from a landscape management perspective, but not from a plant perspective, not from a geology perspective or a climate perspective. Well, the climate does change in a bad way, but we'll get there, I guess. So that's kind of the history surrounding these fires. This is an area that wants to burn and that should burn and that does burn. But people don't like, nowadays we don't like when stuff starts on fire because it's not good for us. So
well, we don't want it to be too close to our stuff.
Yeah.
You can burn over there. Don't come touch my stuff.
Yeah. So that is the other thing that starts to play into it. So, prior to World War II and 2008, LA is a small city, but then, post World War II, Hollywood takes off. You see a lot of building and expansion. And then 2008, you see a lot of expansion in housing. And, the valley is filling up. So people are moving into the national forests surrounding LA. And these, they're moving into what we call the wildland urban interface. So you have these national forests that surround LA. You have, private forests within there, and then historically ranches. The ranches go away. And now all of a sudden you got people who have like a 3-acre yard inside a fire-prone area, kind of near the San Bernardino National Forest, somewhere out here. This is called the wildland urban interface. And this is a dangerous place to be from a fire perspective because, when we have large expanses of, forest and wild, what you could call wildlands, that's pretty easy to manage. Yeah, I can come through if I have money. We'll talk about the money problem in a second. If I got money, I can come through, I can burn this, I can masticate it. Mastication is when you have like a big, it's like a bobcat, the machine that has like some teeth in the front and it grinds up all the vegetation in front of it. And it just
it's a chewer.
Yeah. That's why it's called mastication. Exactly. So it turns like everything under like 6 inches into wood chips. It's really fun to watch work. That's hilarious because you just grind up a lot of stuff.
So that's taking like the forest bed up, right? So any small kindling, any dry leaves, anything like that, it's chewing that up. Does it like spit it back out, or does
no?
It
so
hold
what
on
you do
to it?
Is you take you have like your brush layers. So it's gonna be like 10 feet from like 0 to 10 feet, and vertically is like brush and small trees and stuff like that, and you're turning it all into wood chips.
Okay. And what do you do with the wood chips?
With the wood chips, they, in a more moist climate, they'll just degrade. But in a climate like this, then you can just burn them. But, when they're wood chips, they kind of burn a little bit cooler because you don't have as much airflow in there and they're on the ground. So they get a little bit moister versus if they're standing up, they can dry out. And then you also don't have the ember problem, which we'll get to, which drove a lot of these fires. So, because, when it's like a standing tree, it's going to, wind is going to blow through there. Oxygen is much easier in there. So, we have all these tools for managing these ecosystems when they're larger. But then when we start putting homes in here, it starts to get more difficult. And then we also have to start to rely on private landowners and homeowners to do this management, which gets expensive pretty fast. And also, it's not something that they're generally interested in. Like, you don't move to the mountains to see a black scar. You move to the mountains to see trees. That's why most people do it, even though you need to burn this landscape. The other thing they don't like is when you do a prescribed fire, there'll be smoke in the air and you get so many smoke complaints, even if it's necessary. So that's another obstacle. So when people live in the urban wildland interface, they're expecting, a certain wilderness. They don't like when you got to cut down trees, you got to do management, you got to do smoke stuff. They don't like it. So that's kind of the stuff that gets in the way. And then also if a fire starts, because you live in the path of the fire, well, now you got a problem.
Yeah.
The urban wildland interface has really expanded recently. And that's one of the problems that has driven a lot of that's a big problem.
Right. I've kind of seen conflicting news stories, but what do we know in the Palisade fires and what actually started it? What kicked this off?
Don't think that we do quite yet. I don't think we do quite yet.
I've seen electrical transformers, but I mean, I know that it could be anything. Like I said, it could be a cigarette butt flicked on the wrong pile of brush.
Yeah, it could be chains. Like you said, it could very well be power lines. It could be dragging chains. It could be hot, like someone parks a hot car on dry grass. It could be so many things. When you look at this landscape, prior to the fires, it was, it's been some of the driest it's been on record. We had 2 years of really hot, dry droughts. So like really it's set to burn. It could be, could be anything. And then after these fires get started, you do also run into arsonists who come out to start fires. That's not uncommon at all in large wildfire complexes. People do some weird stuff. I know there've been a couple arrests for it. So like, stuff happens.
Sure.
It could be anything. I don't think there's really any point trying to estimate, trying to just guess what did it. It wouldn't shock me if it was a transformer. That's what burnt down Paradise, was a known issue with the transformer. And we have the hook that wore out from where the cable came off of.
Oh, okay. So
could be a lot of things.
And yeah, I imagine like it doesn't really matter at this point when half of everything is on fire. So we're recording this on the 29th of January. How much of the fire is contained at this point?
They're contained. So if you look at FIRMS, which is a NASA, this is just for fun if anyone wants to do it. So if you look at FIRMS, it's a NASA map that updates things based on heat. Fires are contained. They're mostly out. It's tough saying completely out with these kind of things because there's a lot of landscape. So mostly out, contained. There was even a smaller fire that started kind of like outside of San Diego and near Tijuana, but that's also under control. And then there was another fire near Ensenada this weekish. But these are all under control now. So,
and what does under control mean?
So a couple of things. So when the fire is active, they'll give you a % control, and that when you're managing wildland fire, you're not actually going in there and fighting the fire head on like a structure fire, because these fires are really hot. They're so hot you cannot put them out with water. The water will evaporate before it hits whatever on fire.
Oh, wow.
So what you're doing is you are trying to guide this fire somewhere where it's going to go out. So you're trying to either drive it into the sea, into a reservoir, somewhere where it can't go any further and just going to burn itself out. And then you can come in and you can clean up and put out all the hot spots afterward. That's the goal. That's the best case. Obviously with, the fires that we saw in the Palisades, that wasn't the case because it was too hot, too fast, too much wind. And there wasn't really there weren't a lot of great places to try to guide it right away. And then that terrain is difficult to get those lines established. So a fire line is just that. It's people out there with, Mattocks, with Polanskis, with chainsaws, cutting a physical line, or again, with bulldozers, cutting a physical line through the landscape where there's no vegetation. And you can see these scars on the landscape afterwards, because you're cutting everything out and the soil is usually compacted. And so the goal is we're going to contain the fire within this one area. It's going to burn out in there, and then it's not going to go any further. So the % contained that's reported while a fire is active is how much, so that perimeter that we're going to go around this fire and drive it into our control area, how much is that done? And then afterwards, it's okay. Is it still hot? Are things still burning? The things will be smoldering for a while, and that's just the nature of wild places on fire. But is it going anywhere?
Right. So I guess the idea is we have it here, and it's not going to jump our fire lines and continue to burn somewhere else. Right.
And a great place to guide into is an old burn scar, because everything's already burned out there. What's it going to burn? There's no fuel, so it's going to die in there.
Yeah, turn it back on itself.
The other thing you try to do is you just try to get it contained into a circle and hope for rain. And, in a rainy season, that's a great way to do things. Again, we're looking at some really serious droughts in the past 2 years in California, so that didn't help anybody. But there was some rain recently that helped get these fires under control.
Well, that's good. But climate change wise, though, from what I'm hearing, you say there's monsoon and there's a dry season, right? So did we have a monsoon season this year?
Oh, not really.
Yeah, again, I feel like that's the yin and the yang here. You maintain a little bit of moisture. Of course, forests are always going to catch on fire. Just it happens. That's the way that forests work, but not at least in a way where all of a sudden it's rushing towards a city and causing a lot of panic. And I want to before we get into too much into that, it seemed to be coming to a lot of the outer areas of LA. Was the concern that it was going to start hitting houses and it would continue to burn? Because I feel like
that's what happened. That's exactly what happened.
I feel like it's harder to create a scar, like you said, a fire break inside of an urban area is going to be a lot more difficult. But I would also hope that modern buildings are built in a way that is kind of preventative to that, or is that not a thing?
There's only so preventative you can get. So there's a fire code that has been established that's on most of so following 2008, the fire safety stuff, all the buildings after 2008 are built to, handle certain levels of fire. However, a lot of LA, a lot of the areas that burnt were not built up to that code, built in the 60s. And so they don't have the same fire resistance, but also like fire resistance only goes so long. So if you have 1,000-degree fire, which, was seen on these fires, like it really doesn't matter, what you were built out of, something's going to burn in there. You're not going to burn the concrete, but you're going to burn everything else in a home. You can only be so fire resistant for so long for most things. Like if you take a standard car, like that's not going to start on fire right away, but then you roast it for a little while at 1,000 degrees and all of a sudden the plastic is going to go up. You're going to have real problems.
Sure.
So, you can fireproof things only so much, and then it is what it is. It's 1,000-degree fire. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. I guess all the bricks in my house are going to melt. That's fine. So let's talk about the climate change. Let's go back to that. So we not really a monsoon season, so we don't have that thing that's balancing out these dry times. We don't have the wet times. Now, is this like the first year that this has been a problem with no monsoon season, or has this been kind of slowly deteriorating over time?
So 2 years ago was one of the wetter seasons on record for that area. And so you had really great vegetation growth, and you go into 2 years of really dry. And so vegetation that grew really well is now really dry. And it's so dry you can't do any prescribed fire in there, because if you do prescribed fire, it's going to go. So that's a driver right there. With climate change, it's kind of a great way to think about it as global weirding. So patterns that happened and should happen no longer happen, or they happen at very different rates. Mm-hmm. So the monsoon is not as regular. And the other thing that happened is, the Santa Ana winds, got to some pretty high speeds because of the jet stream is becoming a little bit unstable. And so things are kind of getting funky with these large wind patterns. And that also, I've seen a couple of attribution studies. So they're trying to figure out how much of this is driven by climate change. Excuse me. Obviously, none of these studies are perfect. They can't be because of the nature of what you're doing. But like 25% of the damage and like the intensity of this damage, you can relate directly to climate change. So yeah, this fire, if we have a normal stable climate, probably happens. Probably not as bad though. Right. A lot of these high winds that we're seeing that are causing issues with planes not being able to fly and stuff like that, probably climate driven.
Yeah, I feel like when people think about climate change, they think about everything just changing to one thing or the other, and not just we just can't predict things anymore. Yeah. Like once upon a time, we were able to say there's going to be a dry season and a wet season, and one follows the other, and it all stays in balance. And now we're seeing that relationship get broken up because our temperatures are heating up. It's all those little bits. The 1 degree temperature change in the ocean means suddenly you have a monsoon or you don't have one.
And then the other really fun change that's happening is you're seeing we have a higher CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. And so this is going to get kind of nerdy and botanical for a second. So just follow me. So at a higher CO2 concentration, different types of photosynthesis become more beneficial than other types. So these ecosystems that are largely grass dominated now are slowly becoming shrub dominated. The grasses use C4 photosynthesis, the shrubs don't. C4 photosynthesis works really great if you're stressed in a tough place. But as you have a more CO2 rich atmosphere, then C4 photosynthesis is not as advantageous. So what may have been just a grass fire is now a brush fire, which is a little bit more to deal with. And we're seeing this not just in the hills around LA, but also in the Serengeti. There's a lot of big changes in wildlife habitat there because these large grasslands are now becoming shrublands. You see it in the Midwest. You see it all over. So there's a lot of changes that happen that are not just weather related, but when you have dry air that can hold more moisture, but also when you dry out the soil, doesn't absorb as much water and doesn't absorb it as fast. So once it rains again, you're still going to be in a drought because that water's not going into the ground. And so the plants are having issues, but the plants are transpiring. So they're pulling out water out of the ground at higher rates because, they're the climate is better. The growing season is longer, so they can transpire faster, which takes water out of the ground, and the water is being replaced as fast because the ground is drying out. And so you have these cycles that are a little bit complex at first, but once you start digging into them, you can see that like this is a positive feedback loop in a bad way, because we're drying out the ground, and now the ground's not getting refreshed, but the vegetation grew, and the vegetation is run out of groundwater, and so the vegetation is now dead, but it grew really fast, so there's a lot of it.
Right. You think like, look, everything's growing, isn't it? Isn't it great how much more growth we're getting because of this? But it's really overall causing these problems. Well, not causing these problems, but adding to the problems. Like you said, like a forest fire is normal, but a forest fire of this magnitude is not. And it's because suddenly we have more of these scrubby, tall scrubby things rather than short scrubby things.
Yeah. I mean, this area, again, should burn occasionally. The seasonality in this size is very strange from a historic perspective.
So going forward, I guess, let's talk about the future of LA. You mentioned that a lot of it comes down to land management. And I feel like, land management is one of the best ways that we can counteract some of the problems of climate change. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, yes. And then some extent, maybe we don't want to build in these areas because of the fire danger.
Sure. I mean, but my $4 million house is already there, though.
Right. Well, not anymore. It's not. So now you get to make that decision about whether you want to move back into that fire-prone area. And that's why a lot of these areas, actually, a lot of people lost fire insurance and lost homeowner insurance because the insurance companies looked at it and were like, oh, I'm going to lose money because this house is going to go one of these days. So, there to some extent, we can predict these fires are going to happen, and we know this is a bad place to live.
Right.
But there is management we can do around this. The issue is it's kind of expensive, and the Forest Service and the state governments that run this land just don't have the money to do this management. They don't have the people, they don't have the money, and they don't have the staff, and it's been that way for quite a long time because we've just systematically disinvested in these agencies.
Right. And of course, as you said, a lot of it is privately owned. And if they're not doing it, they don't want to pay that money because why would they? Right. What's the worst that's going to happen? Nobody likes to pay for prevention until suddenly your house is on fire and you have to move back to Missouri.
Yeah.
Not a position anybody wants to be in.
Yeah. So what you can do in a landscape like this is, we can do prescribed fire. So it's going to be a preventative burn, and we can do mastication. You can't do prescribed fire all the time, especially in this landscape, because if it escapes, it's going to be a big problem. So you have to kind of work your way up to getting prescribed fire back in this landscape where it has, happened historically, but has been suppressed for the last 100 years because, Western Europeans don't like fire. So we got to build our way back to getting prescribed fire in the land and then burn this land regularly. And then we also have to ask ourselves as a society, should you live on this, 1-lane canyon road? Like, should you live back here, or is this too much of a fire risk?
Right. And there's millions of people who live in LA, and the idea is not we have to displace everybody, because maybe you don't live near these forests, but certainly if you're buying, the house in the backwoods, which again, you can come to Missouri and do that all day long for real cheap, and it won't catch on fire as easy. I'm not going to say it's not going to catch on fire, but you can have all the trees that you want. Unfortunately, you can't have an ocean. We don't have those. We have a river that is big and muddy and brown, but we don't have the beautiful glittering ocean in the background, unfortunately. But and of course, people are going to continue to do it. And once again, it comes down to climate change not just affecting the world around you, but how people have to consider where they live and where they go now, and not just the rich people who want to live on the 1-lane road down in the canyon. But like everybody, because there's other people in these areas.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these areas are, this land was really cheap up until a lot of this land was really cheap up until very recently. So like, it's not just rich people who are impacted by this. There's lots of poor folks who live back here who maybe can't afford, mastication, which costs a couple of $1,000s an acre. So, there's a lot of reasons why this doesn't happen, but there are a lot of steps we can take to make a house, fire wise, or that's what we talk about when we talk about a fire safe house. We call it fire wise. So we can push back the grass from the house, make sure we don't have a wooden roof in these landscapes, make sure that we have good spacing on our vegetation away from house, that, lawns are well mowed, that, where and when we're burning things, we're going to burn things. It's not always appropriate. It'd be great if we could burn everything everywhere, but we can't. So we're taking these steps, where we can as private individuals, especially around houses, we can do, if we fully funded the Forest Service and we fully funded, all of these other agencies that work on land, we could do a lot of stuff and prevent a lot of these fires and keep them to much smaller scale. But like ultimately, the only person who doesn't put a gas can next to your house is you.
Right.
So we homeowners have to step up and take responsibility for some of their actions and what they do. But a lot of the houses that were impacted by these fires are not in the urban wildland interface. They're in the urban space. And that's, once you get a fire that is ripping with 100-mile-an-hour wind behind it, there is no stopping that. Right. That does not stop.
There's no fire break in the middle of LA.
No.
Do a fire break line right through Disneyland.
Yeah. I mean, you saw embers like fly miles because they're just driven by such fast winds that there's nothing you can do to stop that except, on the prevention side. And then on the cleanup side, we talked about we have to evaluate the fire risk around some of these houses and communities and if it's worth moving back into. But also, when you burn a town down, there's a lot of soil and water pollution that happens. And so there's going to have to be some conversations and thought about rebuilding and if this is a safe place to move into from a pollution perspective.
Right. Yeah. You can't burn a house and a car and just go and move right back on top of it without leaching something right back up into the soil. And, all the things I saw a picture of like a disintegrated bicycle. Like the fires are so hot that a bicycle just completely disintegrated and you could only see the side of it. And like, if that's not up in the air, that's down in the ground. And I don't know too much about how bicycles are made, but whatever it is, I don't want it inside of me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's a lot of questions and a lot of testing that's going to have to be asked. So I'm not saying that we can't rebuild parts of this. I'm just saying that questions need to be asked and tests of various things need to be taken because there's going to be some major issues. I mean, again, if we look at Paradise that burned down in 2018, not a lot of people live there now because there's a lot of environmental pollution that's damaging. Mm-hmm. So there's going to have to be some real serious testing that's done and questions are going to have to be asked about living in places.
Well, Calvin, I predict none of those questions will be asked and people will build right back on it and get cancer. So because that's just how humans are. Yeah. Now you mentioned about being kind of, what was it?
Firewise.
Firewise. Okay. So we've got keep your grass mowed. We've got push, keep brush away. And of course, forest fires are on a macro level. It's not, something that I expect you, the individual living in LA, to prevent yourself, but to keep your house from burning down specifically, in this kind of urban environment. What are some of the other things that people are suggesting to be firewise?
So we don't have any kind of outside, like any like fuel containers, like gas cans, anything that's really flammable. That's going to be in a safe locker. So we want to keep right around the house hardscaped if possible. So we want like stones and rocks and stuff like that, things that are not going to catch on fire. That 0 to 5 foot perimeter, nice and clean from stuff. We don't want to have pesticides up against the house, open paint cans, boards leaning against the house, anything like that. Make that house as kind of just as one of a structure as it can be. If it doesn't have all these little things getting into it, you're going to have a better time, keeping it safe. Then in the 5 to 30 foot range, then away from the house, then we can start adding in vegetation, but we want it to be small. So you don't want to have like a 90-foot tree hanging right over your house, because if that starts on fire, it can fall in the house or it can start dropping embers onto the house. So we want small trees and shrubs and grasses around the house, and the grass, again, well mowed, under 4 inches. I'm a big native lawns guy, but again, like right around the house, we would need a nice fire break around the house. So we're not going to have native grasses up to the house. Fire break around there.
I like the idea of stone. I'm always jealous of southwestern lawns because you don't have to mow them because they don't exist. So just like here's my rocks.
We can do a lawn conversion episode later because I do that. It's a lot of fun. It's very doable.
I tell you what, we have a very small house with very very small chunk of yard. I've converted a big part of it into bird area where it's got a little dwarf cherry tree and it's got bird feeders, and I don't plant anything in there. I just let the birds, whatever they don't eat, turns into mostly sunflowers, but sometimes we get squashes and millet and a few other things. And that was, this year we had a lot of millet growing in it that I had to eventually pull out. But that is like, I hate mowing my lawn so much. It's like the one dad trait that I don't have is I don't give a shit about my lawn. And we've always talked about, going fully native here. And Missouri has a lot of really nice native plants. And my father has nativized his, my father's been a gardener for, decades. So he's got a really nice native look to it. He's also got a shitload of bamboo in his backyard that he complains about all the time. Yeah. He doesn't like his bamboo forest, but whatever. It's
pain.
For those of you not aware, bamboo goes underground and does not die ever. And it is tall too. It's like 20 foot tall bamboo that he's got. And And yeah, eventually I'd like to have something that because I like pollinators, I like birds, I like squirrels, I like every time I open my door, it's like I'm Snow White, all the animals go running off into, I don't know, the street, unfortunately, but it's a low traffic street. Nothing gets hit by a car, thankfully.
Well, we could talk about how we do that in a different episode. So we just don't want to do that right up to the house. We want a nice 5-foot barrier around the house, and then we're good. And you can have your beautiful native grassland around that. And then 30 feet out from the house, then we can start to have, trees again. We just want to make sure none of it's going to hit the house if it falls down in a fire. So there are steps that we can take. Obviously, not everyone controls, 30 feet around their house, especially if you're in these tight suburbs. It's a suburb, and you don't, especially in LA, you don't always have huge lawns and huge areas. So you got to control what you can, what should be right around the house. That's 0 to 5 foot. That's where you can start to make a difference. And the 5 to 20 feet if you have that much space. And if you're right up against somebody else, talk to your neighbor. It's a great time to, make a friend and chat about fire safety and, having a fire safe community. If you look up Firewise or Firewise communities, that's a great resource out there. And there's all kinds of great demonstrations on how to have a safer house and a safer community.
I'm going to have to look up the old 90s cartoons that I remember, not the commercials for fire safety that had the 90s was really big on let's make everything hip hop. And so there's a be cool about fire safety. We need to bring those back. We need to bring back the PSAs for the kids. The kids they don't know that to not lean a board against the house and then go inside.
Yeah. That you don't want to leave unattended gas cans. It's my favorite go-to because you'll see it. You'll be like, why would anyone do that? And then after
I got 2 propane tanks next to my house, so I get it.
Yep, right there. That's exactly what we want to avoid. Because it's fine at normal temperatures, but you throw 1,000-degree fire at it, and now things get a little funky.
Yeah. If 1,000-degree fire is hitting my house, the propane tanks are the least of my worry at this point.
All right, Francis. Before we sign off here, can we dispel a few myths out there?
Let's do it.
All right. So one myth about this is that the fires were caused by smelt and not enough water getting let out of the reservoirs. No, the reservoirs are just fine, but also reservoirs are reservoirs. And so the water in the reservoir does not impact the landscape around it. So smelt had nothing to do with these fires happening or not happening. Nothing at all to do with that. Just a fish. It just didn't impact these fires starting or not starting. Another thing, people were talking about using salt water on the plains and dropping that in the landscape. I think that did happen a little bit, but we have to remember the sea outside of LA is getting impacted by 100-mile-an-hour winds, so it's really choppy. And when you're using a tanker plane, that's a big plane. It's got to hit the water. It has to suck up the water and then has to go fly away. So if it's really wavy and windy, it's not safe, and you don't want to be on the ocean. These planes some of them are kind of old, but they're also all flown by crazy people. If you ever watch the tanker pilots, they're right up against the ground.
God, I know. Watching a tanker come up over a mountain at 100 feet above the mountain is incredible.
Yeah. So these guys are kind of nuts. And if they'll take salt water, but it's not good for the pipes. It's not a great place. And you also don't want to be dumping salt water on land because famously you're salting the earth. So not great. So, the ocean can solve all our problems here. A fun side note here. So most of the tanker pilots, for a long time were Vietnam War vets, because that's the only place you can get the experience flying low and slow and heavy like that is in wartime. And so in the 90s, there was a huge concern about all our tanker pilots are, old Vietnam guys, and they're all going to retire. Well, luckily we had a forever war in the 2000s. And so now most of our tanker pilots, they're either crop duster guys or people who fought in the forever wars.
Yeah.
So that's the nice thing about the forever wars. You get helicopter pilots and tanker pilots who are just nuts.
Yeah, and you get lots of new technology and ways to kill people. It's great. Also Velcro, though. So, who can say if it's good or bad?
Yeah. So the salt water didn't have anything to do with this. These fires are so hot, you can't just put them out with water. So that's where you saw a lot of fire retardant being used. The tankers work on the flank and the front and the front of the fire. You can't fly these things directly over the big fire because you have thermal patterns happening in the air that make it difficult to fly in and all kinds of other problems. So the tankers hit the flanks and they try to keep the fire out. There's no putting these fires out with water because they're simply too hot and you need too much water. And also now you're running into a lot of structural fires. That's the other thing we want to hit. is the fire hydrants there was like, yeah, they ran out because you have whole blocks on fire. This system can't be designed to spray this much water.
Right.
So it wasn't that you can't rake these forests and make them fireproof. That's not how it works. Also, I know that, Trump said a lot of stuff about raking forests in his previous term because that's what we saw in Finland. The Finns have a lot of other forestry issues that result in having really clean forests. I just did a tour in Sweden and Estonia and Sweden, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And you know how many birds I saw? Not many. So there are lots of issues associated with having really clean understories. Mm-hmm. You may not have fire, but these forests should have fire. So raking it doesn't solve all our problems. We can burn these, but it does take getting to a place where you can burn them. So we can't just, prescribe fire and solve all our problems. Because if we go and light these forests on fire today, you're going to burn stuff again. Because it's just there's too much fuel built up. There's too many other problems. So you have to build up to burning them. And then the last thing is like there were DEI in the fire departments. That did not, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter here. Didn't play any part of this. 1,000-degree fires, my man, with 100-mile-an-hour winds. Like, whoever's putting a fire out doesn't matter. So let's just put some of those rumors aside here.
Calvin, thank you so much for coming back on to talk for us. I'll bring you back on. We'll talk about lawn stuff because that's some prime dad content there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got a kid coming soon, so I'm right here for it.
All right, there we go. Where can people find you?
You can, if you just look at Penn State Extension, you'll find a lot of my stuff. I'm on Blue Sky at Functional Forests or Functional Forestry, something like that. You don't need to find exactly me. There's lots of places that you can find educational content. Check out your local extension service if you're in the United States. And if you're not in the United States, just check out an extension service. They'll answer any questions that you have. It's really a great thing that nobody uses. So just check out Extension. It's really cool. We help people for free all the time.
Right. Thank you so much. All those links will be down in the show notes, and we'll also be going out in our weekly newsletter that goes out every Monday that you can sign up for at whatahellifawaitsdad.com. Calvin, thank you so much. We'll get this out. We'll get the word out to the forests. We're going to save the birds.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on, and everybody, we'll talk to you next week.